Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on We-Making, how arts and culture unite people to work towards community well-being. I'm Victor Rubin, Senior Fellow at PolicyLink, one of the partner organizations in this project. On behalf of all our partners and all our supporters, I want to welcome you to today's discussion, and thank you for joining us. I'm speaking to you from Oakland, California, on unceded territory of the Lisjan Ohlone people, whose members are seeking to restore Indigenous land stewardship and preserve the culture which springs from their connection to that land through the Sogarea Te Land Trust. I also want to recognize we're on unceded land that the other webinar contributors are zooming in from around the country, and acknowledge the devastating history of those lands along with the wisdom and traditions of the Indigenous people who are its original owners and stewards. We pay our respects to the Tamaqua and Seminole people on whose lands the Center for Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida sits, the Tongva and Gabrielino people of Los Angeles, the Lenape Haki Inc. people of Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, and the Choctaw and Natchez people of Mississippi. Seattle, Washington, where our first Zoom speaker is zooming in today, is the traditional land of the Coast Salish people and the ancestral home of the Duwanish tribe. First, a moment of housekeeping. I want to review some of the accessibility features we have in Zoom. We have live transcripts of closed captioning as an option for this webinar. If you look down at your toolbar, you'll see a large CC button. You can click on that to reveal a small menu that will enable you to turn on live captioning. You can further adjust the caption settings, such as the size of your font, if you go to Preferences under the Zoom.us menu in the desktop Zoom application. In those preferences, you can adjust the chat size, the screen reader alerts, you can adjust the audio settings and access keyboard shortcuts. One other note, we encourage you to use the chat function for wisdom and resource sharing, and I see a lot of people have already chatted in where they're from. But if you'd like to pose questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A function on the toolbar so that we don't miss them. All right, let's get started. Today, we're going to learn about related ways of building connections among the people in a community. That Ohlone Land Trust I mentioned earlier is a way to build, or in this case, rebuild those connections. And there are many others. We-Making is a report, really a suite of resources that resulted from both a deep dive and a broad survey of one core idea. The formal way of saying it is strengthening social cohesion through place-based arts and culture strategies can lead to better health and well-being at the individual and population level. Now, that idea embodies plain common sense. After all, we would expect that when people know one another better and they trust each other more, then they'll be better equipped to collaborate to improve their health and that of their neighbors. But this formal framing also has a bunch of terms we don't use every day. And while precision and rigor is important in research, a critical task is also to break it down and learn about these drivers and outcomes of social cohesion through the experience of the people who've been leading this work in communities around the country. And that's what we're going to do today. 2 years ago, our partnership started to pressure test an early draft of We-Making with a diverse array of socially engaged artists, public health leaders, community developers, and researchers from many disciplines. We had no way of knowing then in late 2019 that within months, our world would be upended, but in ways that would make social cohesion even more critically important to address a public health crisis that is both global and local, but not only medical, but also social. Nor did we envision that the nation's visceral reckoning with structural racism would so sharply challenge our sense of what it means for a society to be connected or cohesive or not. We shouldn't be surprised, therefore, that the arts have played a key role in our response to the pandemic, or that cultural organizing has been at the heart of the Black Lives Matter movement since its inception. So while the core concepts of We-Making were based on years of prior research and practice, The lessons are very much in and of this moment, and we hope to discuss with you where they lead. Today's webinar is being managed by the Center for Arts and Medicine of the University of Florida, one of the project partners, and we want to thank Communications Coordinator Natalie Rella, Center Director Jill Sonke, and their staff for sharing their virtual space and getting us organized and prepared. Our deepest appreciation goes to Metris Arts Consulting, the group which wrote the We Making report. Anne Godwin Nicodemus, Susanna Laramie Kidd, and Rachel Eng, through engagement with a host of advisors, interviewees, and colleagues, have produced the best kind of research to support systemic change. It's grounded in the experience of local leaders like those you're going to hear from. It's comprehensive in its review of the literature. It's very systematic in how they build a theory of change, and it outlines steps that we can all take. In your invitation, we provided links to access the 4 components of the report, and we'll repeat those later in the session. I hope you'll spend time with the report and pull from it whatever you need. In the report, you'll see 3 case studies, and the leaders of those 3 fascinating local projects are with us today to tell their stories. Their panel will be moderated by Maria Rosario Jackson, whom I'll introduce shortly. First, though, we're privileged to be joined by Mr. Rod Joy, the Chief of Staff for the National Endowment for the Arts, for some opening remarks. The NEA provided important travel and logistical support, enabling that remarkable assembly of arts leaders, practitioners, and scholars to meet in late 2019, as well as guidance on the report's analysis and communications. The NEA was joined by Art Place America, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Bush Foundation, and the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation in supporting both phases of the project, and we're grateful to all of them. So Rod Joy brings more than 25 years of senior leadership experience in the arts, public policy, and nonprofit management to the NEA. Previously, he served as executive director for Change Illinois, a nonpartisan coalition leading systemic political and government reform. From 2007 to 2015, Ross served as executive director of Arts Alliance Illinois, one of the nation's most prominent statewide arts advocacy and service organizations. In this role, Rod championed the arts as a public policy asset and civic priority at all levels of government. Rod, welcome to our webinar.
Human creativity is by far the most powerful force on the planet, and it's an honor to be here today, connected with individuals who promote and exercise that power. My name is Rod Joy. I'm honored to serve as Chief of Staff at the National Endowment for the Arts, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's gathering. At a time of enormous consequence for our country, and at a time when we all need what art brings us, we're grateful that you made time today for this webinar on social cohesion. The Arts Endowment is proud to have contributed to the We Making report, how culture and the arts unite people to work toward community well-being. The report encourages arts organizations, community developers, and public health officials to work together to leverage creative practices and grow social cohesion. As we climb out of COVID-19 and focus on equitable recovery, we know that culture and creative placemaking can reduce isolation, encourage cooperation, build bonds of trust and connection, and bring joy, peace, and purpose to our lives. On behalf of everyone at the Arts Endowment, I want to say how thankful we are for the partnerships, ideas, and big picture framing reflected in the suite of resources under the We Making umbrella. The We Making project brought together a great mix of collaborators from all across the country, and we'd like to say thank you to the people and groups who worked with the NEA to envision and co-fund this project. The We Making project contains powerful ideas and practices, including 5 strategies for building social cohesion that are all anchored in a belief that change moves at the speed of trust. Perhaps what I'm most appreciative of is the big picture framing, the title of the report, the pronoun of we. the poetry of we making. The report makes clear that art and creative practices can shift our thinking from they and them to one of we and us. Recognizing that arts and equity are vital public goods, the Arts Endowment is working to center equity and fairness in everything that we do, from our recovery efforts to our ongoing programming. We see equity as a team sport, and we look forward to working closely and collaboratively with all of you to not just reopen or to return to normal, but to build back better so all of our communities can thrive. As you work to enhance wellness and social cohesion in your community, we hope that you view the Arts Endowment as a ready resource today and into the future. Thank you all for all that you do, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Ra. Our discussion is going to be moderated by Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson, who was a dedicated partner in the development of the We Making resources. Maria's expertise is in comprehensive community revitalization, systems change, the dynamics of race and ethnicity, and the roles of arts and culture in communities. She is a senior advisor at the Kresge Foundation and a professor at Arizona State University. She consults with national and regional foundations and government agencies on strategic planning and research. She advises a number of national and regional projects focusing on arts leadership, arts organizations, and the changing demographics of arts, community development, and health. She's been my colleague on many projects over the years, and I'm delighted that she can lead our discussion today. Maria?
Thank you, Victor, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar and want to thank Victor, Natalie, and Jill for inviting me to be with you today. So our presentations and conversation are going to focus on social cohesion, the connection, trust, and sense of belonging that is critical to collective action. And this is a concept that has had relevance for many years. As Victor and Ra noted, though, it's particularly critical at this time. For many years, we've heard from practitioners and other researchers that social cohesion is an important impact or contribution of arts and cultural activity in community development and in public health. As Ra said, the power of creativity is immense. And I think we've shortchanged ourselves often over the decades by not being intentional about the inclusion of arts and culture in community development, in our public health practices, and how we think about healthy places where all people can thrive. So this work, I think, is so seminal in that it pushes the question. If we do recognize that arts and cultural activity are so critical in community settings, how do we understand this work better? How might we understand the dynamic of creating social cohesion with arts and culture at its core? And how can we understand it in ways that we can be more intentional about our planning, our program design, our policy making, and our practice? So this initiative, the report by Natchez, the conversations and additional writings by PolicyLink, and opportunities like this webinar organized for the Center for Arts and Medicine are all intended to advance the public conversation and greater consciousness about how we build healthy communities where all people can thrive. So at a time when we are reevaluating how we might do our best work, how we will recover, how we will build back better, how we may get unstuck, how we reckon with root causes of things that have been harmful for generations, how can a better understanding of the role of arts and culture in building social cohesion make a difference? And today we have the privilege of hearing from three leaders, Randolph Belle with the East Oakland Black Cultural Zone. Randolph is an artist, an entrepreneur, an activator, and he is an owner of RBA Creative Communications. We'll hear from Madeline England with Heal Natchez, Mississippi. She's a community health director and researcher with the Mississippi Department of Health. And Micah Gursky with the Tamaqua Area Community Partnership in Pennsylvania. He's director and administrator at St. Luke's Hospital and director of the Tamaqua Area Community Partnership Community Development Charity. So each panelist is going to share their work, and this is work that, as Victor said, is featured in the We Making report. And after all three panelists have shared, we'll be in conversation with them about their work. So we're going to get started in Oakland with Randolph Belle. Welcome, Randolph.
Thanks so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. The Black Cultural Zone, or the East Oakland Black Cultural Zone Collaborative, is an organization. It's actually a collaborative, and there's the Black Cultural Zone CDC, which is the umbrella organization and the registered 501c3. But the collaborative is a group of businesses, individuals, organizations that came together. And really the main characteristics that helped build connections within the community were really the strong and longstanding reputation of the anchor organization, which was the East Side Arts Alliance here in Oakland, probably about 8 years ago. And then, a little over 2 years ago, the collaborative and the nonprofit were formed. And it was really the composition of the founding partners, those businesses and organizations that provided the basis, and really the deliberate nature of the launch. It was very, very focused. And we made sure to create some guardrails in terms of what we could do and what we could not do, so we could be effective. The leadership was key. We found a director who had a business background, but certainly grounded in the community. She was from the community. And I like to say that we're a little less non-profity. That is a word. And really everything that we do is based on sustainability, right? We don't want to, have to be just grinding to kind of keep the thing afloat. It's better to formulate our programs such that they can be sustainable and effective. And culture, arts and culture really contributed to building connections through this range of programs that we offer, but they were all based around arts and culture, right? That was the anchor. Within the collaborative, there are a few work groups. There's an arts and culture work group. There's a strong economies, a placekeeping, and then also a quality of life. But everything centers around arts and culture, and like it's all, kind of we activate through that lens. From the beginning, really like the leadership said, and we agreed that we're unapologetically Black, just, kind of based on the historical context of the neighborhood that we're in East Oakland. And we know that like kind of a rising tide does not, kind of float all boats. And so, we did not kind of frame it in that less specific kind of bucket of BIPOC. But we do have like partnerships with like the Oakland Museum, which was an institutional partner, and other organizations. And so we are able to kind of create a broader impact, but making sure that our core target audience is well served. And just in the last time, some of the programs that we have that you'll see in this slide, we lease an acre lot from the city of Oakland, where we created the Acoma Market. And it's a range of activities from protest art, after the resistance, to art projects, just a range of activities. And we're actually bidding on the lot right now. for a development. You know, we've got a development partner, we've got some development capacity in it, and really the core of this, you know, the lasting impact will be the placekeeping, where we will have a permanent and sustainable kind of location. That's really at the heart of much of what we do is ownership. And so we will have a development, a mixed-use development that'll provide a permanent resource for all of the programs of the Black Cultural Zone Collaborative. And I'm 3 seconds short of my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Randolph, for being so vigilant about your time and for sharing your work. We're going to hear from Madeline next. Madeline.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you so much to Victor and Natalie and Jill for inviting me to be part of this, and to Anne and Susanna for interviewing me as part of the We Making project earlier on. It's really just been fascinating to learn about this and see what they were coming up with, and learning from a lot of different communities at the same time I was learning from my own community. So it's just been fascinating to be part of this. I'm going to mainly be talking about the Heal Natchez initiative that was started in the fall of 2016 by a Louisville, Kentucky-based nonprofit, Ideas X Lab. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't really want to speak on their behalf, but I'm fairly certain this was funded by the National Endowment of the Arts, like their original work in that year. And they made several trips to Natchez and started a series of conversations with local artists and brought in some international artists in residence, and did a series of projects over a year. This encompassed several different areas of art. There was photography, poetry, soap making, and performance art. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those. There were so many different partners that were part of this, and if I try and list all of them, I'll take up all of my time. But just know that I am the tiniest piece of this puzzle, and I'm just trying to do justice to the work of all the artists, which was just so compelling and imaginative. So a lot of the work, or one of the initiatives, focused on the National Coalition of 100 Black women and the young women and girls that they mentor. And they call their team Girls and Pearls. They did a series of projects over the year, including a weekend of team building to kind of build trust amongst each other at the start. And then they did these hand molds with soap. You can kind of see the tiny little soap bars on the mantle on the right picture. And they made these soap molds with their hands, and then built these soap bars and put pearls in there that they got to keep and take home and build messages off of that. They did a photo voice project where they looked around Natchez and were asked questions and started to think about what their environment looks like and what they want it to look like. And this culminated in a weekend in, I believe, April of 2017, which is the picture on the top left. It was an evening of health equity in Natchez, and the girls did some performance art where they would sing songs and dance. And it's hard to show a group picture because there were so many people crammed into this house to see what they were doing. But they did all of their performances on an equity platform. So you can kind of see it in that top left picture, but all of the girls were standing on a platform. So from ages 8 to, I believe, 16 or 17, they were all the same height. So it created this very powerful visual of what equity is and how we can visualize that. And then those soap bars were like basically cut into pieces, and then they would insert, the soap makers would insert a button into the bar of soap and then wrap a story. The label had a story on it that they wrote through creative writing. And then the soap bars were used as a fundraiser and distributed to the girls and to their families. So one of the connections that was built as a result of this was through people and sectors. I was fairly new to my job at the time. I probably had been in my community health director role for about a year, and a lot of us were still kind of meeting. I know I was still kind of starting to understand health equity and what value I might add to local community conversations. So meeting the artists and starting to see how these things could relate and what I might be able to add. I was very much an observer throughout this process, but just by watching the work that they were doing and the messages that they shared with the community helped me understand my role. And then they started to see how the work that they do relates to empowerment and cohesion and health. Another connection that was built was building up this conceptual understanding between equity and culture and history. So Natchez is this very historical community. Culture and history are intricately entwined here. They're very much the same things. People's families go back generations, their neighborhoods go back generations, and even the places that were used for these projects were places that were significant for Black history. So the performances were held at the Emile Angeletti House, who was a famous 19th century Black architect. And then the buttons that were inserted into the soap were symbolic of the forks of the road, which in the 19th century, early 19th century, was the second largest slave market in the country. So all of these things people started building connections between cohesion and mental health and well-being and place and history and Natchez. And I don't think those connections, I mean, we connected them all before, but connecting them to our current day health and mental well-being was, I think, something that we hadn't really thought about as a foundation for community development going forward. And then the improvements in health and well-being are how we used this to launch initiatives going forward. Many of the people who were part of Heal Natchez in that year became part of a health impact assessment study that we did on a community development project in 2018 and 2019. And then I think a lot of the art really lifted a lot of our local conversation beyond the rhetoric of racial justice and into how do we translate this into community development. So there have been several initiatives since then, and they've all been ongoing, and to some degree they overlap, but the fact that they've become normal and that there's so many of them is what makes it so powerful. So we have created the St. Catherine Street walking trail. Forks of the Road is being preserved by the National Park Service as a National Historic Park. There has been a civil rights memorial constructed, and upcoming priorities for the Diversity Ingenuity Task Force are to build a memorial for the US colored troops, many of whom came from Natchez, as well as the Watkins Street Cemetery and other sites that are significant for Black history. And we also want to start building up data-driven action plans so that we can start measuring the impact of the work that we do. So I think I'm probably about up. Yes, Natalie is telling me I'm out of time, and I think I'm just about done anyway. So I will turn it over.
Thank you, Madeline. We appreciate your story. Micah, can you share with us, please?
Yes, and thank you, Maria and Randolph and Madeline. It's inspiring to hear your work. So this has been a benefit to participate on this panel. So I'm really impressed. So I work with the Tamaqua Area Community Partnership. If you're not familiar with Tamaqua, it's in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's an old, gritty old coal town. And if you know anything about it, if you've ever seen any gritty old coal town, I don't have to describe Tamaqua. We're just like pretty much all the rest of them. I work with a nonprofit organization that started in 1994 as a visioning project and turned into a rural LISC sustainable community effort. And whether you call it comprehensive community development or sustainable community development. We were just trying to make our community better. And we were following a lot of the traditional paths, you know, the Main Street program, trying to fix up our central business district. And we were pretty successful with that. Some traditional economic development, filling up our industrial park. And we were pretty successful. We actually filled up our industrial park. Developing parks and recreation. And we improved a lot of the parks and recreation in our community. And historic preservation. You know, we did a lot of historic preservation projects, designated a historic district, got people to appreciate the history. And we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. And then about 15 years, 20 years into our efforts, Penn State University did a study of our community that just blew us away, and basically said that the people in our community don't feel like they have a sense of belonging. They don't feel like they trust their leaders and their community leaders. That they don't feel like they have a good relationship and they don't trust their neighbors. All of the stuff in this report that we making, when they talk about social cohesion, we scored really poorly. Their willingness to participate. They felt like that a lot of these community development efforts were done by people outside that weren't involved with them, and it was very cliquish. So we decided to try to purposely do some community engagement using the arts, and to try to get people to engage. We partnered with Rural List, we partnered with Touchstone Theater, which is a theater group about an hour south of us, and we did a project called Dear Tamaqua. And it was very purposeful, and it was designed to improve social cohesion, which is exactly what this report and logic model is all about. And basically what we did, the prompt was Dear Tamaqua, ... and we asked people to write a letter to the community. And they did. We had writing sessions, and we asked people, we go into schools, senior centers. We even printed Dear Tamaqua on blank coasters and put them in our bars, and asked our bartenders to collect them at the end of the night. And you can imagine some of the Dear Tamaqua comments we got on those. They were pretty interesting. We collected more than 700 Dear Tamaqua submissions. That's 700 out of a community of 7,000 people. So we were very, very happy with that. And then with the help of Touchstone Theater and the help of Rural List, we put together a one-day, it was part community festival, part theater, part artistic expression, part food festival. It was a mile-long walking path in our community, and not just down the shiny Main Street, but also some literal dark alleys, and people would go and experience a representation of these Dear Tamaqua submissions, or even a literal reading of them. We had actors reading some of these submissions, and we had thousands of people attend that one-day event. We had a lot of participation in planning that went into it, and we really, at the end of the process, it was over a 2-year process. We wanted to measure whether or not we had impacted the social cohesion, and we asked Penn State to do another study, and they did, and they actually documented that we had actually improved people's trust, people's willingness to trust their neighbors, people's willingness to get involved. And all, again, the sense of belonging, the relationships, the willingness to participate, the orientation towards a common goal, all the things that the We Making logic model talks about as far as social cohesion. And we had actually had documented evidence that we had actually improved it, which was pretty remarkable. We then used that as a launching point to do some additional community-based arts initiatives, and to try to build on that and improve that. And frankly, this last year and a half, we really have to double down on it, because the sense of belonging, the sense of purpose is more needed now than it ever has. And so the Dear Tamaqua project was a simple thing. We didn't do it to be part of panels or be part of studies or reports. We did it because we really felt like we needed to do something to legitimately engage our people and try to build a better sense of community and who we are, to own some of our ugly parts, to own some of our beautiful parts, and to make them all, to talk about them all with a new language. So that's our Dear Tamaqua project.
Thank you for that, Micah. I have a question for each of you, and eventually we're going to open it up to folks that have joined us for the webinar as audience members. And the first question is for you, Randolph, and the work that you're doing in Oakland, which I think is so strong, and it got my attention that there is intention in showing up as unapologetically Black, and doing so in a place that has a lot of pressures, economic pressures, threats of displacement and gentrification. Can you talk a little bit about the role of arts and cultural work in advancing in a context that poses that kind of threat, particularly to the Black community?
That's a good question. Let's see here. Well, I've been an artist, you know, and self-employed in the arts for just about 30 years. Well, just over 30 years, which, as most entrepreneurs know, there's very little time for wasted energy, very little time. And so most of the work that we're doing, it has a beginning and an end goal. And because, you know, that anchor for us is arts and culture, we are trying to be as efficient and effective as possible to kind of reach those end goals. So we don't spend a lot of time on any extraneous stuff that doesn't like kind of move the ball up the field. And even with our, and then just also the focus on ownership. You know, we've got a number of different initiatives that are really kind of supporting the ownership model, because I'm sure it's the same all over the country, you know, in terms of, you know, the arts community, like really being really just hammered, you know what I mean? Just like with our home ownership rates, like the lack of really kind of sustainable facilities for artists and all the rest of that good stuff. You know, we're pretty, you know, kind of focused on kind of gaining some ownership so we can, you know, kind of actually, you know, kind of provide the kind of impacts that we are looking to achieve.
Thank you for that, Randolph. Madeline, as someone who squarely works in the health profession, as you think about what you've experienced with arts and arts activity as an anchor for social change and for work that's intended to advance well-being, what opportunities or challenges do you think are specifically coming from the public health field in efforts to advance this kind of work?
So that's such an interesting question, because that's something I kind of wrestle with almost every day. So I think the same thing that's a challenge is the same thing that's the opportunity. So the public health field right now, I mean, they've been in the middle of this big transformation for a long time about how we move to more intentionally support health equity, right? To work more at root causes and social and economic factors. But I think a lot of people who work in public health, and I say someone who's in exactly this position, I think we struggle to kind of figure out what exactly our role is within that. Because if we're actually working on social and economic factors, that's probably in another sector than health. You know, I mean, that's like education policy or economic development policy. Like, how do we reduce disparities within those sectors that ultimately end up influencing health? And and it's hard to navigate those relationships, because I'm not necessarily an economist. I'm not necessarily a health care worker. I'm not necessarily, you know, education work or anything like that. But we try and build those relationships to figure out what value we can add to that root cause conversation and reduce disparities in those sectors. And I think art is incredibly powerful in helping to take the conversation to the next level. Like what I kind of alluded to in my presentation about like taking it beyond the rhetoric, I think art does that. I think art can kind of introduce new conversations or transform the environment or do, depending on what kind of art you're talking about. But it can play a big role in moving the conversation forward and figuring out like, okay, if we get beyond the point where we're just acknowledging that there are racial disparities in, say, the economic opportunity or education policy or something, then art can help transcend that into what that might look like going forward. And that could be something like a billboard initiative where you create positive messages in the built environment, or change like our memorials to Black history in Natchez, or change the education conversation. I mean, artists are just so powerful with that. And they helped me see what I do in new ways.
So, and part of what I'm hearing is that it helps take things to the next level.
Exactly.
It maybe bridges from level to level.
Exactly.
Change happens.
I've been part of many conferences where we talk continuously about what the gaps are and the disparities and the problems. And I just think artists take it beyond that into solutions.
Thank you for that. Micah, so the Dear Tamaqua project sounds awesome. And the fact that you were able to evaluate it and have some evidence to talk about why it mattered seems like something that doesn't happen that often. I'm curious about the process of arriving at a conclusion that there was impact, and what has that meant? What has having evidence done for the work, or what impact do you think having evidence has?
Yeah, and I wish I had a really good story, Maria, but honestly what happened was Penn State University, they in their sociology department, they had a professor who did a study and studied a whole bunch of Pennsylvania communities and ranked us. And we ranked really, really low, and we kind of got pissed off because we were really proud of ourselves for all the great work that we were doing. And then we read the report and we're like, wow, you know, this is not good. You know, we need to start looking at more than just bricks and mortar projects, and more than just jobs, and really, you know, what makes a community and what connects people in a community. So the Penn State had developed this report and surveyed a whole bunch of communities, and we wanted to change that. One, because we're, you know, that's what we try to do is, you know, when there's an issue or something like that, we try to respond to it. But also, you know, it's really heartbreaking when, you know, when friends or family or neighbors or people in your community don't feel connected or feel like they don't have a voice, or, you know, you know, when you're a community builder, that, you know, you take that pretty hard. So we went back to Penn State and we asked them to study us again. And initially they refused. They said, no, that was a one-off thing and we're only going to do it once. And we're like, look, you can't just say we suck and then just never come back after we try to change it. And we were actually able to leverage some local legislators who helped us convince them that it would be a good idea to come back and see if this intervention had done any good. And we didn't know if it did or not. And so when the evidence came back, they did the same study after the project. You know, it was good to see some movement. Believe me, the study didn't say that everything's perfect in Tamaqua. And if you've ever been to Tamaqua, you would know that that's true. But, you know, but to see movement that, you know, that's attributable to this effort was important for us, and really helped us to move forward and reset our community development work. We still do bricks and mortar projects. We still do economic development. We still do parks and recreation. But now we always try to link it back to a sense of place and the people who is impacting it, whether it's involving them in the process, which we do, or making sure that we're meeting the goals and that connection, that we're connecting people with it. And so it's really reframed our efforts since then. We do a lot more community creative placemaking work so that people feel like they belong and they have a sense of caring about themselves and their neighbors. And it's brought us a different sense of optimism in our community. that people's voices do matter, and that they can make a difference, and that even if things aren't perfect or even wonderful, it doesn't matter. We're still trying, and we're still trying to make positive influences together, and trying to build that sense of community and common purpose. Having the evidence really helped us when we redid our strategic plan. We entitled it "Choose Happiness" and made it very much about connecting with people. And if we're doing a project, does that project contribute to local people and their sense of purpose and their sense of connection and their sense of wellness and happiness? So it was very impactful, but it all started because one professor did a study and we didn't like the way we were ranked, and that's how we ended up with evidence. To the other practitioners in the audience, though, there are people in your institutions who study social capital and these things, and who can measure these things. These are not fuzzy things. There's a science behind it. There's a rigor to it. This we-making study certainly helps people grasp that. But there is expertise in our academic institutions and our healthcare institutions and some other larger industries that really can measure these things. And when you can measure it, then you could actually see if you're making a difference.
One of the things that I've observed in my work for many years is how arts activity happening in community can hold multiple value and meanings concurrently, right? It can contribute to social cohesion, it could contribute to agency, it could contribute to identity building, which may be interrelated, but there's different kinds of impacts and contributions, if you will. There's a question from an attendee that says, how do we get past using the arts as a strategy to aid communication and social cohesion to be more formally acknowledged or recognized within public health as a real social determinant of health? And my read of that is that it's also getting at that schism between art for art's sake and art as instrumental or in service of something else, and how, in my mind's eye, it's not a both and, right? It is part of the power of creativity and art is that it does hold multiple values concurrently. But I'm curious, how would you all answer that question? How do you go beyond understanding art as messaging or in service of social cohesion as more? Anyone can speak.
Well, for me, I hate to always cheapen it with money, but like for me, I can't say this is necessarily true for the Black Cultural Zone. It's really all been, kind of framing the arts in an economic development, or looking at it through an economic development lens. We just happen to be here in the Bay Area where there's just an incredibly kind of rich, kind of arts and culture community. And I think the arts, because of the transcendent nature of the arts and the ability of the arts, I think that the arts can solve problems, far better than, kind of the institutions that are charged with impacting those areas like public health, education. I think the arts, kind of do an incredibly good job. And so I try and frame everything in terms, it's like kind of, like the social impact bonds that people are using to fund different community-based initiatives. I think framing it that way, typically speaking, when we're talking about money, it's something that people can't confuse. Like if you're talking about arts, people get confused, right? Because it's, because we don't all have the same kind of view of the arts, what it is, what it's for, what the value of it is. But you can't really get confused, about money, you know what I'm saying? And so if we use the arts to enable children to learn better or to, kind of fix another kind of social challenge, there's a way to kind of weigh existing methods against these new and more innovative, kind of art-based methods. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
I think you got to some important facets of it. There are a couple of questions in the chat from attendees about artists, and I think I'm going to try to blend a couple. One question has to do with what kind of artists are best suited to do the kind of work that you've been involved in. What are the characteristics of artists who can do that kind of work? And I think the other question has to do with, how do you get artists integrated at the beginning of something so that they're not invited at the end to just perform, or what is often the default understanding of what this work can be, maybe, is make a mural. And that's not to demonize murals. Murals are important and valuable, but it's often the only way that people can think about how artists can participate. So how do you do that? So the first part of the question is, what are the characteristics of artists who do this kind of work well? And second, what do you recommend to increase the chance that artists will get invited into the planning process and actually be on the ground at the very beginning when initiatives are being designed?
I'll wait for the others.
I could take a crack at this. The type. Well, first of all, the first question, Maria, the first part of the question. What type of artists are good at this? They have to be collaborative. They have to have a perspective that's beyond just their art is empirically good for the sake of its own art, and they have to recognize the power that it has and the influence that it has, and they have to be participatory. This isn't, at least in the Tamaqua works that we've done several community art projects. The art is created by the community, whether it's through they're influencing it or literally painting it or participating in its creation. And so artists that don't play well with others often struggle, because they might not be willing to incorporate everybody's thoughts and feelings or find creative ways to get people engaged. As far as how, just from our work in Tamaqua, we talk about our art and culture and our creative placemaking work as a way to build sense of community. And we do that with the same organization and the same leaders and on the same agendas and in the same 990 as our community development work. And so it's on a level playing field. It's not an extra add-on that's going to make a project pretty or look nice or feel better. We try to weave it into the things that we do. And also our art center in Tamaqua, because of the leadership that's there and has been there through the years, has really taken an initiative and actually led some of the projects. And so, instead of adding the art piece onto the end of a project, it's nice to have your art group and the people who are interested in these things and believe in this as a way to build a sense of community. It's nice to have them involved from the very beginning and actually initiating them.
Madeline or Randolph, any thoughts about the question?
I know Ideas X Lab, the group that was working with us, had a phase they incorporated at the beginning, and I may be using the wrong word, but I think they called it a discovery phase. And they really spent quite a bit of time with the artists just learning about their work before they identified any projects that would come from that. So rather than identifying artists to be part of the work, it's more like they followed the artist and let the artist determine the work that came to follow. And because none of those projects were pre-identified. I mean, they all came organically from conversations with the artists. And I'm pretty sure there were a couple of international artists in residence that were part of that conversation. And I think that was also invaluable because you have these local artists who want to be involved and engaged. But I think once we're in our own comfort zone or we're used to doing things a certain way, we don't necessarily see how transformational, like what we could be a part of. And those international artists, there was a guy, Cadu from Brazil, and I think maybe a couple others, but they really came up with these incredibly innovative, creative ideas, and bringing those two those artistic voices together, the internal and the external, really created some fantastic initiatives. I think that was a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Randolph, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think if you strip away the title of artist, then I think you also strip away some of the expectations and limitations of, kind of how and when, they might participate. And as long as you are, just the participants remain creative and, like Micah said, collaborative, I think there's a good chance that you're going to be able to solve some of the, kind of existing challenges. And then at what stage it becomes easier to get, kind of creatives involved at early stages. A lot of the work that I'm doing right now is, it's kind of largely communications, but it is really just like kind of looking at creative ways to engage in the real estate development process. We've got just an incredible, we're coming, we're at the end of a development cycle, a real estate development cycle here, which is seeing just unprecedented, economic, an economic boom, but artists were not involved, and so like kind of lower income populations did not benefit. And what I've been doing is just working with developers, on arts integration strategies beyond just the requisite, we've got a 1% or a 0.5% for the arts, but looking beyond and like kind of picking apart those development budgets to figure out where you can engage artists along the way, and then it becomes a workforce development, initiative for the artists. It becomes, a way to create broader impacts for the surrounding neighborhoods and the residents and tenants around, this development. But it has to be done. And I think more people are, from the development community are looking at ways, innovative ways. It could be a budgetary issue. Kind of there's some alchemy in bringing artists in early to find creative ways to do more with, the same or a slightly increased budget.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those were really thoughtful responses. There's another question. It says, can any of you discuss the relationship between art and culture and what that looks like in communities you work in?
The difference between art and culture?
The relationship between art and culture.
All right, go for it, Madeline.
I think, okay. Well, I mentioned in the presentation that history and culture are very much the same thing in Natchez, and that so much of that is part of the built environment. Natchez is just very much a historic town. It's the oldest settlement on the Mississippi River. The Natchez Indians were here since the probably about 700 years. 700. Anyway, it has a very long history, and all the culture of the area is just so intricately twined between Native American history, Black history, Spanish history, Italian history, French history, and all these different aspects and how they tie together. And that's part of the built environment. So I think on one hand, it's building, first of all, we start to address that disparity by building Black history into that built environment. But the other aspect of art and culture is economic opportunity for me, and how you build art and artistic opportunities into the creative economy. So for us, tourism is a very big economic sector. And what we wanted to start thinking about is how we encourage Black entrepreneurship as part of that, the economic sector, and how Black artists play a big role in jumpstarting that. So I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but to me, it's like both history in our community and also the creative economy and how we kind of start to build those out and build more equity into those.
Mhm. So I would just want to riff and ask a related question, which has to do with how does, from your perspective, the work that is art-based, how does that intersect with racial equity, be it economic equity or health equity, or any number of ways that one can interpret that? How does it impact racial equity?
I'm going to start with the previous question and then hopefully like some of that in, and then I'll let Micah get in there. But in some ways and in some contexts, like art is the process and culture is the people, right? And so we're doing a program called Art for the Movement, which came after the murder of George Floyd. Like Oakland is Oakland did Oakland, right? And you know, there were just protests every day, but then the riots came and, you know, people boarding up, and this happened all over. But of all of the, you know, I don't know, 1,000, there were just a lot of, you know, kind of temporary murals and such that went up on the boarded buildings and such. And we tried to figure out what's going to happen with this artwork. It would be great to get some to East Oakland, blah, blah, blah. And so, and like they say, no good deed goes unpunished. We actually became, we led an effort to collect the artwork, to document the artwork, to preserve it. And we did not want it to be an art project. We wanted to make sure that this was not an art project. This was not about the art itself. It was really about the underlying issues as to why this artwork was created, and that was the loss of Black life. And we knew that we had to hold the conversation moving forward, you know, as the Black Cultural Zone, because there were other organizations involved. There was the Oakland Museum and another organization called Art Murmur. Both of them, they were not Black organizations, but they were more institutional and, you know, kind of non-Black community organizations, but we partnered and we came to some understanding. We actually spent a significant amount of time developing a set of guiding principles on how we were going to move forward. And like I was meeting with them, you know, this morning, like we do every week for the last year and some change, about how do we move this, you know, conversation forward using this protest art, you know, kind of as the basis. You know, and in the process of this, we found that of the thousands of pieces of artwork, there were literally a handful, it seemed, of Black artists. And so, you know, from that, we've kind of created some opportunities for more Black artists to kind of participate on an ongoing, and there are like kind of some enterprises. Other people wanted artwork, and so we were able to kind of create, you know, it's just been kind of going like that. But I think, you know, it was more of the underlying issues. It was the culture and not the art that was driving this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maria, can I just, if I do, you know, Randolph, I think what you're saying is really powerful, and it's great to see the community do that. I think for Tamaqua, you know, whether it's racial equity or equity issues or anti-oppression work or I think the arts are really the only alternative sometimes to have a productive conversation. A lot of times these things are so politically charged and difficult to talk about, that, you know, getting people to the table requires a sense of safe place, a sense of you know, being able to express yourself without fear of you know, of you know, being hollered at and yelled at, and to take risks and to really have meaningful conversations. You know, I think the arts are, at least, and then in Tamaqua, we've used the arts to try to have difficult conversations about our heritage and our past and our present, and frankly, our future. And you know, and if we had these at the city hall, or if we had a professional planner come in and try to give us all stickers that we can go put stickers up on a sheet somewhere and rank what's important to us, it's a totally different dynamic than asking someone to express themselves as part of a participatory community art project, where their voice, where they can express themselves in a way that they feel is safe.
Mhm. Mhm. Any thoughts on your end, Madeline?
Okay, I'm gonna put that, not too much background noise. So we're in Southwest Mississippi in a pretty rural area, and there are some pretty deep racial and economic inequities. Our house, that's something that we really tried to link into the research that we started doing from the health impact assessment that came out of that first year of collaboration. We really linked racial or race-based economic inequities, especially into our understanding of current health and where we are as a community. I don't know if I have a perfect answer for that, other than I feel like it's something that we all became a lot more aware of over the course of the HIA. And when I say we, I almost mean more intentionally the white community of Natchez, because if I had one goal over the HIA, it was to get the white community more comfortable with the term equity and what it means, and how there are very specific inequities that exist in our community. I mean, I think it's something that in the South, people can get very defensive when the idea of race comes up. White people especially get very defensive about it because so many reasons. But I think oftentimes one thing we really tried to do in every conversation that we had over during the health impact assessment that came to follow was we made sure that to connect our conversation and start the conversation by defining structural racism and systemic racism and acknowledging what we think, what those are. And giving examples. So median household income for whites in Adams County is $42,000, versus median household income for Blacks is about $20,000. So that's a pretty disgusting disparity. And it hasn't changed that much over 50 years. And that's something because through the HIA, we were looking at civil rights, historic preservation and civil rights community development. So we tried to look at the arts and what kind of community and development, I'm trying to articulate this into one sentence, community development that would capture the significance of Black history and convey it into something that would be a path forward, while also capturing the data of economic disparities by race, and using that to make decisions for economic opportunity and for community development. I really don't know if that just came out as a bunch of babble, but I think what we were trying to do over the course of the project, and what the Black community told us through the stakeholder engagement that we did at the beginning, they told us, make this health impact assessment, which was about civil rights and civil rights history in our community. They said, make this not just about conversations with Black people, have conversations with white people too, where they're acknowledging what the history was, because too often people want to celebrate the heroes without understanding what their role in it may have been. So if I consider any kind of accomplishment that we've had about linking culture and racial equity, it's that I feel like people have gotten a little bit more comfortable with inequities that exist in our community. And I know that because they're always sending me article links about health equity. And they're like, Madeline, this is what your project was about. And so I think they're starting to get comfortable in linking those together.
It's interesting because what you're describing is in some ways going beyond social cohesion, but it requires some social cohesion to do that.
Yes.
Right? So there is it's kind of, what's the next level beyond the ability to cohere, to come together? There's a question about the ability to sit with discomfort, the ability to interrogate and unsettle some orthodoxies about what is the narrative of that place even.
Yeah. And I never know if I'm saying everything correctly or if I'm jumping into a conversation at the right time in Natchez, or if I'm taking a role I shouldn't be taking on by advocating for these conversations, because sometimes it just does feel very delicate at times. One thing, so our previous mayor got a lot of applause because he is a Black man, he's gay, and he was elected with 96% of the vote or something. Like that was in all of these articles everywhere. It's like our Black mayor, and he was elected with 96% of the vote. And that's so fantastic. We're so progressive. And then our current mayor now is a white male. But what both of them have done is create these memorials, which I'm not necessarily a huge memorial person because you aren't necessarily completely changing the dynamic of the status quo, but they really made a huge effort to convey to the community and make it normal, like make it completely part of our everyday vernacular, that Black history is our history as a community, and we all should be celebrating this. So they've both done that, and they're both building these Black history monuments that are one more step in that direction.
Yeah. Micah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Maria, I think you pointing out the fact that you have to have that trust first before you can move on into meaningful action and changing systems. And I think and I think that's where this remaking can be very powerful for communities that are grappling with whatever issues. And I'm not putting anything on the same level, but the comment was about environmental issues. There's a question about that. If you're dealing with racism in your community or sexism in your community or other anti-oppression work that you think needs to get done, how do you get those? And if you look in the remaking book, they have the Venn diagram where these things overlap in social cohesion. And at the center of that is this, I think it's trust. And I think to get to that place where you can move on and have meaningful action, I think you have to get to that level of trust. And there's a lot of communities, myself and Tamaqua included, where we're not there yet. And I think that the arts can be a very powerful way to move the community towards that social cohesion that's necessary to make that systemic change. It's not going to happen by itself. And I really think that the people who put their minds together to put this report together have really put something out there that can be picked up and used to try to get past some of these issues where we don't trust each other and we can't have conversations and we don't have this shared sense of community, and it's an us versus them type of atmosphere, no matter what the issue is. And I think if we could, if using the arts to do that is going to be more productive than some other ways. Don't ignore the political activism and don't stop on those things. But those really difficult conversations can often be started with a creative art project that's truly and genuinely collaborative.
Thank you for that. And it's unfortunately time to wrap up, because I think this conversation could have gone much longer, and I appreciate as far as we got with it. So Randolph, Madeline, Micah, thank you all for sharing your wisdom, your stories today. And with that, I'm going to turn my mic over to Victor.
Thank you so much, Maria, and all our panelists. This is all very inspiring, and I really appreciate the candor and thoughtfulness of the discussion. But we have more opportunities to continue this work, and I want to close with an announcement about an opportunity for everyone on the webinar. Are you working to build connections in your community through the arts in an effort to amplify the We Making framework? And with generous support from the Kresge Foundation, the Center for Arts and Medicine will provide $21,000 stipends to individuals or organizations who write a thought piece about a recent or forthcoming example of practice, so the sorts of things we've been talking about today that demonstrate the We Making framework or have the potential to situate the project within the we making theory of change. We're especially interested in current practice examples that center COVID-19, pandemic recovery, and/or racial justice efforts, the two themes we introduced at the beginning of the webinar, so that we can build out a body of practice that's timely and relevant and which people can learn from one another. So if you're a community partner or an artist, a colleague or collaborator in this kind of work and interested in applying for this stipend, email Natalie Barella. Her email is on the screen. She's at the Center for Arts and Medicine and has been turning all the gears and levers in the background for this webinar, for which we thank her greatly. And she will give you details and be in touch over the next couple of weeks. And with that, as again, thanks to everyone at the Center for Arts and Medicine, to Maria, for all our panelists, to Rod Joy, we thank you for sharing this time with us and look forward to talking with you more.